All right, I'll go ahead and take it from there. Thank you, Emily and Evan. All right, so thank you guys for being here. I know it's cold. I'm from Kansas City, and being up here in Omaha for the last 2 weeks, I'm new to the area. It's been really cold for me, so really appreciate you guys coming out and bearing the weather tonight. I'm the cloud practice lead for Sogeti here in Omaha. Part of my role is to help grow our cloud division here in the market, reaching out to folks like yourself, understanding what your skill sets are, and helping us drive client engagement. A little bit about Sogeti. Sogeti has over 200,000 people in our workforce. We're a global entity. We have developers, I think, 40 countries around the world. One of the things I want to touch on here is, let me ask a question. How many people have heard of Sogeti here in Omaha? Everybody. Great. Okay. So one of the things that I like about Sogeti and what I've identified when I first started working here was our Applied Innovation Exchange. And what that is it's a program to help business executives understand how to digitize their core business functions, right? So if you're trying to compete in a digital economy and not get outpaced by your competitors, what do you want to do, right? You want to maybe go through a hackathon style type presentation, or you want to meet with someone maybe in the Silicon Valley space that maybe can help you drive your business forward. And Sogeti, we have this Applied Innovation Exchange, which allows business executives to go for maybe 4 or 5 days and sit with folk and brainstorm how to evolve their business. That's one of the things I'm most proud about. So enough about Sogeti. Let's get into why we're here. Everybody in this room is an architect. You're an engineer, right? You guys are driving the digital future. And one of the things that I want to touch base on is the need for digital transformation resources. People like yourself. Everyone knows what's happening in the economy, right? People have probably been paying attention to what happened to Payless just recently, right? 100-year-old company like Sears is going away. They're shutting down. Why is that, right? They're not keeping pace with the competition. And one of those ways they're not keeping pace is digital transformation. This is a report from International Data Corporation from Microsoft that says where digital transformation is going. $20 trillion, dollar industry, 20% gross domestic product, right? So what this means is that, digital transformation isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And for companies to stay abreast of the competition, they're going to have to evolve. And if they're going to evolve, it's going to be because of you people sitting in the room, right? So you got some executive that's going to say, hey, we want to transform how we're interacting with our customers. We want to transform some of our core business operations. Those executives, like myself, they're not going to do that, right? They're going to come to folk like yourself. You're going to be the builders. You're going to be the architects. And another thing I want to call out here is when you see, by 2020, 60% of all enterprises will have a fully articulated organization-wide digital strategy platform. That's going to be because of you guys, right? It's going to be because of your ingenuity, your ideas, and the things that you bring to the table to help drive businesses forward. So one analogy that I want to bring up here is I had an opportunity to work with a company in Kansas City. They wanted to digitize how filmmakers interact with film festivals, and so helping filmmakers get their content out there. And one of the ways they did this was they utilized a platform has anyone heard of Video Indexer, Microsoft Video Indexer? Okay. Basically what they did, when one of my developers came to me and said, hey, there's a competitor in the marketplace by the name of Film Freeway. What this platform does is that if you're a filmmaker, you can submit your film, and it allows you to, it's a list of 1,000 film festivals around the world that allows you to submit your film to, right? And the way that company makes money is that they take a percentage off of those film submissions. Now, the company wasn't providing any value, no insights on the film, no intelligence on the film submissions as it pertains to runtime, any risky scenes in the film for screeners and so forth and so on. This wasn't a lot of value that they were providing. So basically what one of my developers did and say, hey, let's start leveraging Video Indexer to provide those insights on film submitted. And I'll show you guys that here in just a moment. the age of disruption. So everyone knows what's going on, right? You see Netflix, Airbnb, some of these companies coming in, digitizing how you consume products, right? Everyone knows the story of Blockbuster, right? And so now this may not pertain to everybody in the room. Some of you may work for organizations that are not forward thinking, right? But it doesn't really matter, because you see this really striking statistic down here at the bottom is that, companies that were on the Fortune 1000 list more than 10 years ago, they're not on there anymore. So even if your company that you're working for today is not innovating, they're going to be forced to innovate because the market's going to dictate that, right? So I'll go on with this and talk about a company by the name of Deluxe Technologies. So would anyone believe that HBO still submits their pilots via DVD to distributors? Anybody believe that? They do, right? But this is kind of an antiquated process. What this company is doing is finding a way to digitize digital rights management. If you're trying to disseminate your film and you're an HBO, or if you're a Showtime and you want to get it out to distributors, well, what they've done is build a platform that's all web-based that allows you to ingest your film, and it's protected, encrypted in transit, encrypted at rest. And when playback, let's say, for example, if you're a distributor and you're trying to play that film, upon playback, it's unencrypted when you're trying to view it. Does that all make sense? Okay. So this is one of those companies that's on a digital transformation edge, right? They're finding ways to help companies like HBO protect their content, but also finding ways to dynamically allow them to disseminate more on the fly, opposed to shipping a DVD in the mail, right? All right, so I'm going to get to what I was talking about earlier, which is Video Indexer. I went to school for film before I decided to take the boring route of business management. And so somehow I ended up in this career leading cloud practices, but I still have an affinity for film. I had an opportunity to work with a client down in Kansas City. They have a channel, and one of the ways that they wanted to digitize was to create their own OTT platform so that they can disseminate and stream, kind of like Hulu, kind of like Netflix, and so forth and so on. But what I'm getting ready to show you is Video Indexer. So what it does, it has a level of artificial intelligence built into it, facial detection, celebrity identification, account-based identification, thumbnail extraction, visual text recognition, and it also has audio insights as well. If you are a person that wants to create your own content, basically what this is allowing you to do is to find more dynamic ways to offer up your films to potential consumers. And I'm going to show you that here in just a little bit. Anybody have any questions so far? No? Okay. All right, so why does all this matter to you? Well, it matters to you because you guys are the innovators, right? So I'm going to provide one more analogy before we get into Video Indexer. I was working on a project for a transportation and logistics company in Kansas City. And one of their CIOs came to us and said, hey, all of our processes are manual, none of it's automated, it's all these disparate systems, none of them talk to one another. Can you find a way to help us be more efficient in how we do our business? And we said, yeah, right? So we came up with an idea to build them an application that allows them to dynamically connect with consumers and also connect with carriers in a more dynamic way. But one of our developers came to us and said, hey, this third-party system that we're working with, it allows us to see all the loads that have been posted by a customer. And so we said, well, what do you mean by that? Well, this company, what they do is, how they make money is being able to ship freight as fast as they can, right? They said, hey, well, when a carrier drops off their freight, what happens next? Well, we're like, well, that carrier has to call back into this company and say, hey, give me another load. And so it's not very efficient. And so one of our developers said, hey, well, this system allows all the loads that have been posted by consumers to be displayed via API. Why don't we build a system that allows for a load finder? So if you are a carrier, you have a load, right? You drop it off. You don't necessarily want to have to call the company that you're dealing with and say, hey, where's the next load at? You can, from your mobile device, say, hey, the vicinity or the radius where I'm at, let me find a load. And then you can, on your trip back, you can go to the nearest location, pick up that load, dial it into your phone, and you're on your way. This was thought of by a developer, you guys. So this is one of the ways in which digital transformation is taking place. So when you think about digital transformation, and I want to hit on this one last time, it's not a buzzword, right? Everyone says, cloud or IoT and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, sometimes it is being used in a buzzword fashion, but digital transformation is real. We're seeing companies every day go out of business because they're not evolving. And the companies that do evolve, it's going to be because of their workforce, and it's going to be you guys. And that's why I felt like I had the pleasure to talk with this group today, because you guys are the driving force behind what our digital future is going to look like. All right. Let's get out of that for a sec. Any questions so far? None? Okay. All right, so what I'm going to show you here is Video Indexer, right? And so I've taken the liberty of ingesting a film already, one of my favorite films, which is Inception, Christopher Nolan film. What this program does is that you ingest it, and it goes through kind of a artificial intelligence cognition to bring back results and data on your film. You can see that in this particular film, Leonardo DiCaprio is the main actor. It shows you how many times he appears in the film. And then it also will show you other actors. Let's see, let's go to Tom Hardy. Right, and it'll show you how many times he appears in the film. And then that's just, for example's sake, let's go ahead and click on one of these. So it goes to the point in time in the video.
You didn't plant it deep enough?
No, it's not just about that. You need the simplest version of the idea in order for it to grow naturally in your subject's mind. It's a very subtle art. So what is this idea that you need to learn?
All right, so you guys can see that it somehow it knows to go to that particular point in time in the video and pull up Tom Hardy. That's all the AI processing that was done by Video Indexer. By the way, this uses Azure Media Services on the back end, just in case anyone's curious about that.
How long did it take to index the whole film?
It was about 45 minutes, yeah.
Including upload, or?
No, upload took maybe about 15, yeah.
You may not be able to answer this one, but how much did that one video cost?
Well, this isn't torrent. So what do you mean call? You mean as far as the price for a Video Indexer? It's free. It's free. It's free. Video Indexer does charge you, I think, if you do 600 transactions or something like that. But this is a trial base, so
That's a free load.
yeah, it's a trial. This was a trial, so it's free. Yes.
Okay, cool.
And you can see it also went through and basically gave you a synopsis of what the topic of this film is about, which is dreams and dreaming. Pulled out some keywords, and what I find most interesting is the labels that it was able to pull out. So the labels are basically OCR, doing optical character recognition on items within the film, right? So let's say, for example, let's go to the gun.
Make it done.
Right, so it was able to pull up, it ingested this, saw that that object was a gun, and provided you with that output. Any questions at all? Does anyone think this is cool at all?
Sewing machine? I don't remember the name.
You see sewing machine on there? Yeah. I'll click on some of these, but let's do, where's sewing machine at?
Right there. You were right.
Why isn't it off the
Right.
down?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Doing just fine.
And one of the things about this is, of course, it's not 100% accurate, right? But you can train this, right? You can train this as developers. This has an API. You can train this to detect certain images that you're modeling for the indexer. For the sake of time, I'm going to keep going. So Panavision and Warner Brothers, where do you think these would all, show up, right? You see at the very end in the credits, right? So it's reading the credits. One of the things I find very intriguing is the sentiment algorithm. It can detect, based off facial recognition, if someone is sad or happy. In this particular one, let's see. Let's just click on one.
Make it, darling.
So I'm not sure if you saw the guy's face. He kind of looked sad. He kind of looked happy. So it's not 100%, but it can pull some of that out. There's one per. Go ahead.
On previous bits, we had brands.
Yes.
Does it also do object recognition, like, hey, that's a Mercedes, that's a BMW, I see a Coke label on the
Yes.
table?
Yes, it does do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Basically, your was it brand integration into your movies.
Yes. Sorry about that. Come on.
Austin here. I knew we needed to escape, but she wouldn't accept it.
Does she look sad to you?
She locked something away, something deep inside. The truth that she had once known.
No? Yes?
Chose to forget.
Did she look sad? Okay.
She couldn't break.
All right. Yeah. So it's not perfect, but it's meant to be trained. And that's where development comes in. So I'm going to hop over to the timeline. And it allows you to search on key words. So we know that this movie is about what? Dreams. So let's just type dreams in there. Where did I have that one at? Let's try this one.
Our dreams, they feel real while we're in them, right? It's only when we wake up that we realize something is actually strange. Let me ask you a question. You never really remember the beginning of a dream, do you? You always wind up right in the middle of what's going on.
I guess, yeah.
So how did we end up here?
Well, we just came from the,
Think about it, Ariadne. How did you get here? Where are you right now?
dreaming.
You're actually in the middle of the workshop right now, sleeping. This is your first lesson in shared dreaming. Stay calm.
It's a great freaking movie, right? Right. You can see how many times they mention dream, and that should be denoted throughout here. At any point in time they say dream, you can go through there and go to that exact point in time of the film and look up that scene. You can think about other use cases for this, though. Let's say police traffic cams, right? Let's say someone says something in it, and you don't want to go through and watch the entire film or video footage. They said a word, go to the word they said, and then go to that specific point in time to view it. I'm going to pull up another word.
Philippa are
You
waiting.
know where your hope this truck will take you.
They're waiting for us.
Purpose is sure.
Oh, look at me.
But it doesn't matter.
Oh, God damn it.
Because you'll be together.
Sweetheart, look at me. Oh, no. Jesus Christ.
She had herself declared singing by 3 different psychiatrists.
Yep. So I had some other words that, for dramatic effect, because this film's so dramatic, to pull up. But I won't do that. So make sure Matt gets enough time to speak. But I'll keep going through the presentation really quick, so you guys can see some of the other projects that we've worked on. One sec. All right, so digital transformation project that Sajetti's worked on has been for a leading QSR chain. We helped them develop their mobile app and drive 8 million downloads to the App Store. So when you think Sajetti, it's not just consulting, it's not just staff aug. We are doing some really innovative things with our clients. We sit with them, we help them determine what their core business is, where they're trying to take their business, how they're looking to differentiate themselves in the marketplace, and come up with innovative ideas to help set themselves apart. I mentioned this earlier about the Capgemini, and for you guys that don't know, Sajetti's part of Capgemini, or Capgemini's Applied Innovation Exchange. And this is something I really think is cool, because if you are a CIO or if you're a CEO and you want to start figuring out ways to digitize your business and come up with ideas that help set you apart from the competition, how do you do that, right? And you kind of do that hackathon style, going through the steps of, what's your core business functions, what type of insights and data do you need to appeal to your consumer. So this is part of something we've done with Bolanger to help them build a urban store. So any of you guys that are thinking about where you're going to work next, it's going to be Sajetti Capgemini. And this is something we did for Chick-fil-A. We did a journey map, basically helped them build out a mobile application as well. It doesn't state this here, but we helped them identify the personas of their customers. Now, we know baby boomers are getting older, right? Who's going to have the largest purchasing power coming up here in the next 5 to 10 years? It's going to be millennials. Millennials don't buy the way that their parents did. So, companies that are going to thrive, they're going to have to appeal to millennials and Generation Y. We sat with them and helped them come up with something to help them, identify what their customer wants. And so this last little bit here is just basically to challenge everyone in the room. I know that one person can't change a culture, by themselves, but you guys are literally the ones that are going to help formulate the digital future, as I've been stating this entire time. Sajetti does something, and we do these internal hackathons to help our new hires, especially our developers, collaborate with one another and come up with ideas and concepts that help our clients, right? So we have one going on right now internally for
Insights and data.
No, what is it? It was
Under Armour.
Under Armour, right? So yeah, so we got a hackathon going on right now for Under Armour, and the guys are coming up with some really cool stuff. Basically, how to help Under Armour, appeal to a young generation. But that's all I have. Any questions before Matt gets in here? No? Pin drop? Okay. All right.
Okay. Matt Elmore. I've been with Sajetti for about 6 years now. I'm the National Solution Architect for DevOps and Cloud. So I spend most of my time trying to optimize the software delivery process. Before I get started, how many of you would say that you work in an agile or startup type environment? Okay. How many of you work in a traditional enterprise, maybe even waterfall type environment? Okay, so kind of a mix. I'm going to speak primarily to the group that is dealing with the processes that maybe are a little bit slower. But hopefully the information will be useful to those of you that are in more of a startup environment too. I've been doing DevOps for about 11 years now, so it wasn't even called DevOps when I got started with it. So basically DevOps is next generation business agility. The agile process tried to accelerate the software development process and tried to, very rarely was it successful, but it tried to make the handoff from the business to the development team more efficient. Oftentimes the handoff was still waterfallish, so we tend to call those organizations WAGIL. And there's a lot of them out there. Basically, what we're talking about is being able to respond to change, whether we're talking traditional Agile or true DevOps. We're talking about being able to respond to change. How many times has somebody, say from the business, walked up to your desk and said, wouldn't it be cool if your application could do this? And we're 2 months into a 3-month delivery, and being able to deliver that feature is going to take about 60% rework in order to do that. This is really what we're talking about being able to address. Also the ability to get changes out there, to get feedback quickly. DevOps is really about reducing the cycle time so that we get near instantaneous feedback on the work that we've done. So most of you have probably seen this little diagram. That's kind of the standard symbol of DevOps. We plan, code, build, test, release, deploy, operate, monitor, and back to plan. And hopefully we are doing that quickly. Hopefully we're getting feedback from the business at the end of every sprint or even during a sprint. So this is the traditional silos. Basically, each one of the handoffs, those manual handoffs that you see between silos, how many of you work in an organization where the silos tend to be adversarial? How many of you, if you're a developer, how many of you have a problem with dealing with the guys from QA or the guys from operations? I can't get a VM fast enough, or it takes forever to get feedback from this QA group, right? The ops guys are saying those damn developers, they just never get the code to me in a package that I can effectively deploy. What we're talking about with DevOps is getting rid of the silos. Culturally, probably what you've still got some standard job descriptions, but instead of management over that silo driving your day-to-day work, they're more of an HR manager for you, and you've got a cross-functional team whose sole responsibility is getting a project out the door. How many of you work in an environment like that? Product-based delivery. Okay. Where the main focus is everybody's rowing in the same direction. You don't have one guy out there trying to turn left when everybody else is turning right. So we have to start redefining teams. We've got to enable behavioral change. Redefining those teams is, we now have a team that is fully cross-functional. We've got an ops guy, we've got QA, we've got development, we've got a product owner who's our direct line to the business. You know, we're able to take, everybody on that team is able to make sure that from requirement to release, we have the capability to do every step of the way, okay? Lean concepts end to end. We're trying to take a look at what is it that I'm manually doing every day. Everybody in the room familiar with ThinkGeek website and their t-shirts? Personally, my favorite is the one that says, "Go away before I replace you with a very short shell script." That's DevOps. It's automating a task that's repetitive in nature. So, and then lastly, automate. This is what the DevOps tooling flow looks like. You know, we've got our business handing us our user stories. Those go into our agile tracking tool. And this diagram is meant to be tooling agnostic. Doesn't matter what tools you use. You can do DevOps with any technology stack, with just about any set of tools. Some sets of tools adapt better to some technology stacks. How many of you are dealing with a polyglot stack where you've got multiple languages involved? Okay, how many languages are you talking?
4.
4? 3? 3? 3? 3? Okay, I worked on a project once where we had 13 languages in flight. 300 developers working on a common code base, and we were releasing to production once a day. Now, one of the things that we did in that particular environment was we put a wrapper around every build process that had a common instruction set. So if I wanted to do a build and verify, so build my code locally and run all of my suite of tests locally prior to push, it didn't matter what language that I ran it in or I was dealing with at the time, it was the exact same command. Can you see how that might be beneficial to a team? If all you have is a set of .NET developers and 3/4 of your code base is not C#, what's the likelihood that you're going to end up with a build process that you can use across the board with the exact same commands regardless of what language you're building at that time? Most of the time, if you're dealing with a C# project, you've got a Visual Studio solution, right? So that doesn't do you a lot of good if the guy over here is building a Maven project, and this guy over here is building a Scala SBT project, and this guy over here is building a Gradle project, and somebody else is building a Ruby project. And then we've also got our single page application JavaScript project as well. Getting down to a common tooling set where you have zero learning curve to build your project is extremely beneficial, and something like this will support that. In that particular case, about 30% of the code base was C#, and the wrapper that we used was a Ruby Rake wrapper. If any of you have ever utilized Ruby Rake, it's got a great plug-in for handling .NET projects that all you do is point it at the solution, and it will handle all of that for you. So There's a Ruby gem for Rake called Albacore, which handles .NET projects. And that was what we used in this particular case. So, but what you see is, we've got some changes in name. Anybody familiar with the title SDET? Anybody know what an SDET is? Software Development Engineer and Test. This is not, I repeat, is not what's typically referred to as a test automation engineer. What does a test automation engineer typically do? Selenium, QTP, right? The SDET is focused primarily on things like Cucumber or SpecFlow, more of a behavioral-driven testing environment. And they're a software engineer. Their primary focus is those automated tests that are going to provide value, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few slides here. But they're a software engineer. They are not a guy that spent 20 years doing manual testing that was then taught how to record a script for Selenium, okay? So we've got them both checking, both our developers and our SDETs checking code into source. Basically with this model, everything is source. Our tests are source. Our code is source. Our infrastructure is code. Our databases become code. Anybody work with database migrations? Any database migration tools that you've worked with? What have you worked with? Okay. Okay. Any others? Any heard of DB Maestro? DB Maestro is particularly slick because most migration tools allow you to go from old to new, but they make it real tough to revert back. Your revert process is basically restoring a backup. DB Maestro is one that actually keeps version control in the database itself and is both forward and backward. So it's one that I've used on a couple of projects. There are a number of them out there. Redgate makes some great migration tools. Sometimes building your own migration tool makes sense. For the most part, you're running a bunch of SQL scripts. So building your own migration tool is not that difficult. Okay. It basically follows the workflow, does the deployments to the various stages. We always promote binaries. We don't build for every environment. With virtualization containers now, we often will promote the containers themselves. Okay? Any questions?
What kind of platform do you use?
The original implementation was on VSTS. And I will get the link for you, but we have a YouTube video that takes you through this VSTS implementation. So I'll get that link to you. This is Zebia Labs' periodic table of Devops tooling. Just so you know, this is only about 20% of the tools that they have that they list in their catalog. Now they don't make all of these tools, but these are the tools that we deal with every day. And this is one of the reasons why I say that from a DevOps perspective, we're tooling agnostic, because we can't guarantee that one tool will fit everybody's need. if you're a Java shop running on Unix, Azure DevOps may not be the right choice for you. But if you're a .NET shop that's doing all Azure PaaS-based and function as a service solutions, then Azure DevOps is probably a pretty good choice for you. So we, just like anything else, we try to pick the right tool for the job. Being an old Unix programmer, I got involved in the Perl and Python wars, and one of the best jokes I ever heard about Perl was it's the perfect language, it's the wrong tool for every job. And if you've ever tried to read somebody else's Perl, you'll know what I mean. But this really gives you a great picture of the tooling landscape for the various domains of tooling in the DevOps space. And if you do a search for Zebia Labs periodic table, it'll take you straight to this link. And if you click on any one of these tools, it'll open a panel dialog and show you a description of that tool and a link to the vendor and all that. So, okay. So, starting out, we always want to start with continuous integration first. A lot of shops will never get to the point where they're doing continuous delivery or continuous deployment, but anybody can benefit from continuous integration. And there are three main components of continuous integration: our source management, our test management, and our build management. And they are in that order. Until you get your source management under control, there's not much sense in doing a lot of work on your automated tests, and there's certainly not much use in automated builds. How many of you are doing trunk or master-based development? Okay, using feature toggles?
We're working on it.
You're already doing, what kind of code coverage do you have? Low? Okay. And what deployment frequency?
Very low. 3 times. We're pretty much at 3 times a year.
Okay. So what source control tool are you using?
We're now in Azure DevOps
Okay. All right.
with Git.
Using Git. Okay. All right. Is anybody using feature toggles on a regular basis? Okay. What kind of code coverage do you have? Not great. Okay. Is anybody in the room working on a code base that has above 60% code coverage? Okay, got 2. How about 70%? Okay. How about 80%? Okay. 90? 100? Okay. What percentage are you at on your code? 90 and 95? On all languages, or are you just doing back-end code, or what are you?
One language.
Just one language? Okay. C# or?
Sure.
Okay, so no front-end work in your code base? Okay. All right. 95% coverage is phenomenal. Generally, on back-end C# or Java, we try to target 80 to 90%. The reason for that is you typically will have about 15 to 20% of your code base that is methods with no logic involved. It could be an accessor method, something like that, and there's not much value in writing unit tests around something like that. So that's why we typically target 80 to 90% coverage. Obviously, with C#, There's less in the accessor methods because we're dealing with properties there, but in other languages, that's typically what we're looking at. So, commit frequency. How many people are committing their code once a day? Okay. How many are twice a day? Okay. What time of day? Right before lunch and right before you leave? That tends to be the common one with twice a day commits.
It builds and it's not doing anything weird.
Typically, on a 2-a-day commit, what we generally recommend is right after lunch and first thing in the morning. That way you're around when you break the build. And don't, has anybody in the room never broken a build? The old saying in DevOps is if you find somebody who's never broken a build, you can cut them from the team because they're not doing anything. So source management, we're basically looking at branching models, commit frequency, and feature toggles, okay? Branching models, I was recently working on a project where they had 87 repositories and the smallest repo had 187 branches, some of which hadn't had a commit in over 4 years. And the naming convention was all over the place. So that's the anti-pattern, just in case you're wondering. There are 2 primary branching strategies that we look at in DevOps. The first is what's typically referred to as a Git flow, where you have feature branches that are short-lived. By short-lived, I mean shorter than a sprint. If you've got a feature that takes longer than a sprint to develop, your feature or story was incorrectly sized and should have been broken down further. They should never cross sprint boundaries. How do you measure velocity, right? So that's one model. And with that model, we typically will use feature branches. The name starts with feature, and then either a dash or an underscore, and whatever the user story number is, okay? Makes it easy to track. It also makes a couple of other things easy. We can create hooks in Git that go back to our ALM tool, and if a story is marked closed in our tool, we shouldn't be committing code to it. So we can block a commit if the story is closed. The other thing that allows is it allows us to follow a simple naming pattern that anything that starts with feature, we just build on check-in to make sure that the unit tests and the behavioral tests pass. Okay? So we can alert people before we try integrating. Okay? This is before we get our pull request to merge into the next level, which is develop. Develop is our first integration layer, and let me get to that in just a minute because I've got a whole slide around that. TDD, anybody do TDD or just unit testing? Anybody know the difference?
Make the test first and watch it fail.
Red, green, refactor, right? So what's the value of test-driven development versus user testing? What?
It removes pretty much any apprehension for modifying the code.
Yeah. Takes the guesswork out of it. Another thing that it does is it forces you to write testable code because you wrote the test first. You write the test after and you'll sit there looking at your code and think, how am I going to test this? It forces good code structure, okay? It forces simplicity. Clever. Ever try to maintain somebody else's code who thought clever was good? Fun, isn't it? So that's test-driven development. ATDD, anybody familiar with that?
It's basically acceptance test or behavior-driven development. You're testing that the functionality is correct rather than code.
Yeah, and you're doing it up front. Your QA, your developers, and your product owner are agreeing on the acceptance criteria up front. You write that in Gherkin syntax, generate out your fixtures, code the fixtures, and you're doing that up front rather than just pure behavioral driven development, which can be after the fact, okay? Test pyramid. Everybody familiar with that? I'll show you an example of what a test pyramid looks like. The typical test pyramid right now in most organizations is 90% manual testing and 10% end-to-end tests. That's the typical test pyramid. Okay, manual tests. Every time you make a code change, you've got to do those again manually, right? So you've got manual regression. You've got a 10% automated test base that's end-to-end. Are end-to-end automated tests particularly valuable? Ever have one fail and the first thing that you needed to figure out was whether or not somebody changed a label on the field and now the test is broken? Or is it actually a defect in the code, right? Anybody have that one? Now, once you've determined that it actually is a problem with your code, where is the problem? Can it tell you right away? Can it tell you what layer the code problem is? Very little value in those. They're extremely brittle, and they provide very little value. They provide very little feedback, and the feedback is not instantaneous because, first off, most of those end-to-end tests are written 2 to 3 sprints after the code went in, right? If you're lucky, sometimes they're further down the line than that. Who remembers what they had for breakfast this morning? Okay. Who remembers what they had for breakfast on November 22nd? You had the same thing for breakfast every day, don't you? Those of you that don't have the same thing for breakfast every day, trying to remember what you did that long ago, imagine trying to find that spot in the code. Add to the equation the possibility that the guy that wrote the code has been gone from the company for 2 months, and now you've got to figure out what they did, and they were clever. Good luck, right? So with build management, we're looking at feature builds, integration builds, and release builds. Okay? And we'll get into a little more detail on that in a minute here. Anybody have a question on what those build types are? Okay. Source management. We've got 2 types that we want in DevOps. Ideally, we want a trunk or master-based approach. To do that, we really need to have feature toggles, and we need to have a substantial level of code coverage to be successful with that. We're talking a minimum of 70% coverage, preferably over 80% coverage, and a good set of feature toggles. Those of you that are doing feature toggles, are you using a bought commercial solution or did you build it in-house? Build it in-house, okay. Both front and back end? So you built one for JavaScript and one for C#?
Yeah, they're related.
Okay. All right. There are commercial solutions out there. One that I'm particularly fond of is one called Launch Darkly. It supports about 18 different languages, and they've got 5 more under development right now. It's a common API across languages, and instead of a service-based approach or a database approach, it uses a content delivery network to deliver its toggles. Anybody not know what a feature toggle is? Okay. The easiest way to explain it is it's an if check. If feature true, execute this code. Otherwise, we don't execute the code, okay? So some examples of feature toggles that are outside the DevOps world. How many of you have apps on your smartphones? How many of you have purchased add-on purchases for an app? That's enabled with a feature toggle, okay? So that's an example of where we would use a feature toggle. Another example is we've got a feature that's not quite ready for release, but we're in an environment where we're doing trunk-based development and we're deploying to production every day or every week or every 2 weeks or every month, whatever the case may be. But we've got a feature that is not ready for release yet. And maybe we want to do a Canary release first. Everybody know what a Canary release is? Anybody not know what one is? Okay, Canary release is where we've got a set of beta testers and we want them to be able to test something but not have it rolled out to everybody, okay? It's, the name comes from taking a canary down in a mine. The canary dies first, right? We want to fail fast if our feature is not what we want it to be. But we don't want to roll it out to everybody and upset our entire user base. So we roll it out to a select group. They give us the feedback on it, and then we can gradually roll it out to more and more people, okay? So we need feature toggles to do that. We need feature toggles just to keep things hidden from production when the code is already in production. This is the difference between a deployment and a release. We can deploy code to production and not release that code to production. And we do that through a feature toggle, okay? We can have code sit in production for months before we finally release it by flipping a switch without having to do a deploy at all. So this is the difference between release and deploy. The second type of branching strategy is the Git Flow type, and that's where we've got our feature branches that are short-lived. We've got our develop branch where we merge in to integrate. And then we've got our master, which is where all of our development releases or tags off of, okay? Commit frequency. Ideally, we want a commit frequency of 4 to 5 times a day. And that is pushing, not just commit, okay? For those of you that are using distributed source control like Git, we want, by commit, we're talking a commit in the same sense as what a commit would have been under SVN. It actually does go out to remote and everybody else has chances at it. Anybody know why we want to commit frequently? Merges are extremely painful when we don't. I had a project a few years ago where we had 200 developers working on it, and we had 3 main teams with several scrum teams under each team. And what we ended up with was a situation where our tech leads from each of those 3 teams spent their entire life merging what that team and that team did with what I did. And when your entire job is doing painful merges, we lost about 2 tech leads a quarter to attrition because of that environment. The quicker we're merging in, the less pain there is, and the easier it goes. So we also get the code integrated sooner, so we know whether or not it's going to impact somebody else's code, right? Code reviews. Anybody doing code reviews in their organization? Okay. Not often enough. How often are they happening?
Major changes that are marked by our manager.
Okay. I wouldn't consider that a code review, but
I try to get in there every once in a while, man.
who is using Git as their source control? Okay. Using pull requests. Every pull request should be considered a code review. It doesn't get merged unless it's been reviewed and passed, okay? Anybody do paired programming in their organization? All the time or just swarm on a problem? Pretty much all the time? Okay. Paired programming is a great way to do test-driven development and do on-the-fly code reviews, because you've got 2 pairs of eyes on the code at all times, and you've got collaboration going on. So, but code reviews are essential. Pre-commit verifies. Anybody not know what that means? Okay. You got a suite of automated tests, unit and ATDD tests, right? Do we want to just run them on the build server? A pre-commit verify is a situation where I run the tests prior to pushing the code. Okay? You're supposed to. I've actually worked in organizations where we build it in to where it had to happen because it created a hash when we ran the tests and pushed it out, and we couldn't push unless our hash going in matched the hash that we were sending in. So, and enforced it, but should always run pre-commit verify. Otherwise, it's the same thing as the 515 commit and the 516 pull out of the parking lot. Feature toggles, I talked a little bit about build versus buy. If you've got multiple languages in this stack, most of the time when you build it in-house, you'll cover about 90%, and then you'll hit that edge case and you'll wonder what you're going to do next. There are some tools that are best left to the people that all they do is develop those tools. So, good source management is the foundation of a DevOps delivery. Without doing good source management, all the rest you might as well forget about. Had a client recently that brought me in to talk to him, And they were looking at IBM's Urban Deploy because it would handle the deployment of both distributed systems and mainframe systems. But they have never used source control of any kind in their mainframe environment. So they want to automate their deploys, but their code change process consists of making a copy of the file, making the change, and copying it back. And if two people are working on changes at the same time, then you've got to go through a manual merge process before copying back. And they want to do automated deploys. You got to get your source control under control first. Test management, as I said, TDD forces a testable design. Valid example. Your unit test of the little slide bolt is perfectly valid. It does everything that slide bolt is designed to do, correct? It wasn't designed for a sliding door, however. So this is the need for both unit to test that the component operates as intended, and the integration or acceptance test to make sure that the two things integrate and work well together. So, excuse me. Target coverage, like I said, for C# and Java is typically 80+%. Coverage for JavaScript is generally targeted at 100% because there is absolutely nothing in the JavaScript code that is not testable. It makes sense to test everything in your JavaScript. ATDD provides the upfront executable example of expected behavior. Another nice thing about ATDD, if you have a code base that is lacking coverage, rather than developing unit tests for that, it is much more beneficial and you'll get results much faster by utilizing ATDD. Most of the time I'm going to use the definition from Michael Feather's Legacy Systems book. His definition of a legacy system is any system that lacks automated tests. A legacy system does not have to be something sitting on a mainframe. Legacy systems are about systems that are difficult to manage. So if you've got a brownfield project that's lacking code coverage, ATDD is a great way to build coverage over it. And it provides you with some manual regression as well. The test pyramid is what you see over here on the right. Much larger unit tests, component tests, which are the start of your acceptance tests, then your integration tests, smaller percentage of end-to-end tests, and then some exploratory tests, which are basically pen tests. Okay, so that's the test pyramid that we look for. Okay, end-to-end tests, like I said, they provide the least value, longest feedback loop, and they're what most companies invest in most heavily. You know, if you can show the value of the ATDD, you'll get a lot further with your code delivery than you ever will with the end-to-end tests. End-to-end tests are great for a deployment smoke test, making sure that your deployment worked, that the system's talking to the database. But covering 50% of your system with end-to-end tests, 50% of your system with end-to-end tests, that's going to take hours to execute. Covering it with ATDD and TDD, we're talking minutes at most, okay? the other end-to-end tests that we like to see, and we want to see those done much sooner, are performance tests. How many of you have worked on a system where the results from the performance test were delivered the day before we deploy to production? Or perhaps the same day? A couple days later? A week before when it's still too late to do anything about it? That's the typical cycle for performance tests. So we want to get those further, we want to shift those left. Everybody know what we mean by shift left? Move it to the left of the timeline? Okay. So we always want to move everything we can to the left, okay? So that includes our performance tests. Can somebody give me a definition of a performance test that would cover all aspects of performance testing? What tool do most of your organizations use for performance testing?
Product owner logs on and goes, it's a bit slow.
Okay, I've seen that one, yeah. Define a bit slow, right? Load runner, stress, yeah, any of those. Most of them are, how many of you are working on an application that utilizes some kind of a single page application JavaScript framework for the front end? Okay, Angular, React, anything like that? Okay. Typical performance testing is looking at HTTP traffic between the service layer and the front end, okay? So in the case, particularly of a single page application, what we're looking at is data transfer via AJAX, right? What happens when we start pushing most of our UI code execution down to the browser? Does it slow down? Is that tested by our performance test tool? No. I've seen a case where the HTTP traffic to load a panel was sub-quarter second. It was 128 milliseconds to load all of the data. The panel itself took 38 seconds to load. Well, the DOM tree was 178,000 nodes. To render that DOM tree took forever. Did we effectively performance test? The tools for that type of performance testing are really just coming into existence right now. There are some of them that are coming in. With Angular, there is Protractor Perf, which is Chrome only, but it will still give you some indication. There's another one called Cypress.io, which is able to measure the performance of single-page applications, and that's framework agnostic and can test any of the single-page application frameworks. So, you know, performance testing has changed drastically with single-page application and pushing so much of the execution down to the browser. Moving on to build management. And with feature builds and integration builds are really going to come into the picture only if we're using a Git Flow Type environment, okay? Feature build, we run the unit test suite, the ATDD suite. We push no artifacts at all to the binary repository at this point because we haven't integrated with anybody else's work yet. It's merely a sanity check of the work that I'm doing right now, okay? The integration build happens when we merge our pull request from our feature branch into the develop branch. We start to do integration for the first time. We rerun those suite of tests. This is where we first run our static code analysis tool, whether it's SonarQube, Veracode, any of those tools out there. And we're going to deploy to the development and QA environments. And this will push a snapshot type artifact to the repo, to the binary repo. It's not a final artifact. It's one that can be utilized by other work streams in development that have it as a dependency. Our release build builds off of the master branch, runs all the same quality gates once again, runs all the end-to-end tests and performance tests, and deploys to the staging environment. Releases are, particularly in the Git environment, releases and release candidates, all they are tags. You know, the idea of a release branch goes away in this type of an environment, whether we're talking the Git flow with the various stages or pure master-based development. You know, we're utilizing feature toggles to hide the code that's not ready for general consumption, but we're working off of one stream. We create a tag at a known good point, and we can release off of that if we want, or we can just release, because hopefully by the time things are getting to our master branch, they should always be in good shape. We should have broken things further upstream, okay? So the more you mature, the less duplication is required. As you see, we're doing those unit tests and ATDD tests at every step of the way, where if we're on trunk-based development, we're only doing them once. Now I'm going to get into some of the things that, anybody heard of Azure DevTest? It's a management portal for managing your Azure environment for dev and test VMs. With it, you can schedule machines to your servers to turn on, say, at 7:30 in the morning. They shut off at 5:30 at night. Manage your spend. I know the guys from Microsoft don't necessarily like to hear that. They want to sell consumption, but it allows you to manage that. Azure DevTest is an extension of Sageti's OneShare. Sageti OneShare was developed by, it was actually developed by our global cloud CTO, who is a Sageti Labs fellow. And it allows you to manage that environment, those lower environments, more effectively. It was a donation that we made to Microsoft as part of our partnership. Microsoft has extended upon that, but it started out as Sageti OneShare. When it comes to DevOps, we are a Gold DevOps Microsoft partner. We have worked closely with Microsoft for quite a while. We've got a lot of certified architects and engineers in the Azure space, and our first implementation of that reference architecture that I showed earlier was actually on originally VSTS. It's now on Azure DevOps and is in its fourth version. And we have that templated out and have that as an accelerator for clients. So we can come in and drop the templates in place, and you've got a DevOps environment with all of the hooks necessary to feed things back and get your monitoring in place and all that. So that's all I've got. Anybody have any questions? I know I probably talked longer than you guys wanted to listen, but yeah.
I'm just kind of curious, with the, when you're release building, and say one of the end-to-end tests do fail, do you hotfix on that? Excuse me, do you hotfix on Master? Do you do like a small feature branch and merge that in? Do you use directional? Like, what do you do?
Hot fixes are an anti-pattern. I will guarantee you that if you try to do hot fixes with cherry picking, 99% of the time you're going to end up merging in something wrong and making it worse. If you have feature toggles in place, you turn off the feature toggle. And you don't worry about it. The other thing is, if it fails during that release cycle build, we should only be promoting those things that pass. So if it fails at the build level on a test, it gets flagged as a bad build, and chances are, I'll go back to my soapbox about end-to-end tests and their lack of value. Chances are you're going to find that your end-to-end test was not a broken build, but rather a broken test. Somebody changed a label on a field on a screen. Or things got out of, your end-to-end test is waiting for something to load from an AJAX call and it hasn't loaded yet, but it goes ahead and tries to push a button that hasn't been shown. A lot of times they could be a wait statement on a test. It's not the test failing, it's that the test was wrong. The vast majority of the time end-to-end tests, it's not code related, in my experience. Now you may have some exceptional end-to-end testers that have never made a mistake. If you do, let me know. I want to come to work there. So, does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
On your pyramid, your testing pyramid, is any of that manual testing, or is that all automated?
Some of your exploratory may be manual testing. Any of the manual testing that is going to be happening is something that's going to be sprint verification in sprint, and it's going to be sign off on the acceptance criteria. That's really where you should be experiencing manual testing. Manual testing, other than that, is really going to be duplicated effort of an attempt to do manual regression testing. Any other questions? Hopefully this gave you some ideas. Feel free to contact me if you have some questions, and thanks for your time.